And we begin with our big story. A jury now weighing whether Rudy Giuliani should pay millions of dollars to two former Georgia election workers. The former Trump attorney already found liable for making false claims about the mother and daughter, who then faced racist and violent threats. Rudy Freeman and Shaye Moss are seeking up to $43 million in damages. And today, one of their attorneys told jurors that the pair are entitled to even more money. Giuliani admits he falsely accused Moss and Freeman of manipulating ballots during the 2024 election, but he argues that his words were protected under the Constitution. Jury deliberations have ended for the day. They are set to resume tomorrow. Joining me now is ABC News senior reporter here in Washington, following all of these developments. Katherine, they deliberated for hours. The jury deliberated for hours. It seems like we're going to have to wait just a little longer before they make that decision.
Yeah, we will, Faith. And this trial has gone really fast. I will note that it just started on Monday. The jury began deliberating early this afternoon. They deliberated for a little over 3 hours here and then sent a note to the judge that said they were ready to go home and come back tomorrow around 9 a.m. Eastern time to continue their deliberations. I think it's worth pointing out here that they're not finding Giuliani guilty, for example, of defamation. This is about, as you mentioned, how much money Giuliani will ultimately pay. Shaye Moss and Rudy Freeman, of course, are asking for $24 million each, up to $24 million each. Rudy Giuliani and his attorney, for his part, essentially says that that is too much, that he shouldn't have to pay that much. All that said, they will be back there tomorrow morning in the courthouse continuing their deliberations.
And, you know, the closing arguments were really interesting. We heard both sides deliver those closing arguments today. Giuliani's attorney acknowledging his client must pay something, but encouraging the jury to actually issue a measured punishment, calling Giuliani a good man. So did jurors appear receptive of his argument there?
Well, it's hard to say and hard to tell until we hear ultimately what the jury decides in terms of damages here. But Faith, as you mentioned, these were interesting closing arguments. Of course, we heard attorneys for Freeman and Moss talk about the reputational harm that they face, how they've had mental health issues along the way since Giuliani has been making these public comments after the 2020 election that were false about them. But also, as you mentioned, Giuliani's attorney, Joe Sibley, was trying to toe this fine line here. He was saying that Giuliani acknowledges that his statements were false. He even said, the attorney for Rudy Giuliani said that they were irresponsible comments, wrongful conduct. But even though it was wrongful conduct and irresponsible statements, he shouldn't have to pay or be subject to paying as much as the plaintiffs are seeking.
And Katherine, you talked a little bit about this. I just want to go back to that powerful testimony from Freeman and Moss during this trial. They said at the time that the threats they received were hugely detrimental to their lives and their mental health. You saw them break down on the witness stand. What else can you tell us about their testimony there?
Really emotional testimony, at times testifying through tears, Faith. We heard Rudy Freeman, Shaye Moss especially say that she didn't just like her job as an election poll worker. She loved her job, and that Giuliani's comments essentially ruined her reputation, given his public profile and what he was saying. As she had to quit her job, she applied for other jobs. She said she gained a lot of weight. She couldn't leave her house. At one point, Freeman said she was forced to leave her house because of all the threats that they were receiving, with no way to really counteract them, given that Giuliani was acting on behalf of former President Trump and alleging that these two women essentially changed the votes, that they tampered with ballots in Fulton County on Election Day. So it was quite emotional testimony from those two women. And Giuliani's attorney said that Giuliani ultimately decided not to testify because the women had been through enough.
And another interesting development during this trial, you remember Rudy Giuliani admitted that the statements that he made during the 2020 presidential election were false. But earlier this week, he seemed to have backtracked on that in an exchange outside the courthouse with our ABC News live anchor, Terry Moran. He sort of backtracked on all of that. I just want you to take a listen to this.
Do you regret what you did to Rudy Freeman?
Of course I don't regret it. I told the truth. They were engaged in changing votes.
There's no proof of that.
Oh, you're damn right there is. Stay tuned.
So if Giuliani keeps making statements like that, the one you just heard there, even after this is over, could he face even more legal trouble?
Yeah, he could, Faith, and the judge overseeing this case, Beryl Howell, had admonished Giuliani inside the courtroom for those statements, saying that if he keeps making these defamatory statements, he could face another defamation suit down the road. And his own attorney, Joe Sibley, in court essentially said that Giuliani hasn't helped himself the last few days, admitted that his comments outside the courthouse haven't been helpful. I'll note that what he's saying outside court, he's not under oath. He's, of course, under oath inside court, hence why he likely didn't take the stand to testify in his defense.
And at this point, the jurors have left for the day. They're going to come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning to continue deliberating. At this point, how could this payout, whatever the amount is, be enforced, especially considering Giuliani is already reportedly facing financial difficulties? So no matter how much the amount is, no matter what the decision is by the judge and jury here, what are the difficulties moving forward?
It's a good question, and it's hard to say. If Giuliani doesn't have the money, he's not going to be able to pay them. It would be on Moss and Freeman essentially to figure this out with Giuliani, if there's any assets, for example, where they can figure this out. But if Giuliani just doesn't have the money, if he's bankrupt, then he can't pay them. So it will be interesting to see ultimately how that plays out and how that's ultimately enforced, Faith.
Katherine, thank you so much for staying on top of this for us. All right, we want to bring in the big story to our panel. Joining us right now, we have ABC News contributor, Sirius XM radio host Mike Muse. We have ABC News political contributor and former Republican Congressman for New York, John Katko, and ABC News political contributor and former Democratic Senator for North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, and ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, LZ Granderson. John, I just want to start with you. You're very familiar with New York politics here. So how do Republicans in that state feel about where this is right now in terms of Giuliani, where he's been, his fall from grace essentially, and what's your take on what critics are saying has been really a major fall from grace for him since his 9/11 days? At one point, he was called the mayor of America.
Yeah, you know, I remember 9/11 vividly. I lost friends on 9/11. As many of New Yorkers did. And the way he handled himself on 9/11 was great. And the way he handled himself as a federal prosecutor beforehand, like I was masterful. He really went after the organized crime and did a great job. And I followed in those foot tracks, partly because of the path that he blazed. And it's hard to juxtapose that person with the person that we see in courtroom today. Liability to me is not an issue. And I don't think they can give these people enough money, quite frankly. His conduct has been disgraceful, and his fall from grace has been really kind of stunning. And I think it stunned a lot of people who know him, like myself. And you look back on his conduct at around January 6th of a few years ago and up until today, and his comments this week outside the courtroom, it just doesn't make any sense. And like I said, liability is not an issue, and I don't think they can give these poor people enough money. Their reputations have been destroyed, and they've been destroyed intentionally. And the law gives them an avenue for redress, and I'm glad they're seeking it.
And Heidi, I would imagine Democrats are watching all of this, all the civil and criminal cases against Giuliani. What's your sense of their reaction right now? Are they reveling in all of this?
I don't think anyone should take any joy in watching someone who goes to a courtroom and says, I'm so sorry, I'm not going to testify because I don't want to hurt your feelings, then walks out the door and repeats the lie. I mean, that is just pathetic behavior. But the most important part of this for those of us who watch the danger to democracy is a large jury verdict sends a very clear message in the next campaign cycle. Do not lie about election workers. They are not regular politicians. They are simply doing a job. And I hope, as the congressman said, I hope they throw the book at him. And I hope that they really evaluate what this means for our democracy going forward, because a large judgment will send a clear message. Giuliani, he's beyond repair, in my opinion.
And Mike, to Heidi's point there, you know, the impact of all the racist and violent threats that Freeman and Shaye Moss received here, they've talked about it, they've detailed it. It's part of the, you know, one of the heartbreaking things about this trial. So I guess the question to you here, in terms of how this has affected these two families, or the family, these two victims here. How Giuliani's claims appended their lives and had severe impact on their mental health. How much money here should he have to pay them? They are seeking up to $43 million. What are your thoughts on this?
Just as the previous panelists have both mentioned, there isn't enough money that could get rid of all the mental anguish that these two women have gone through. But I like where Heidi was going, Faith, with that. And what Heidi was alluding to is that it sends a signal to other individuals not to do this type of treatment to public servants, those who are volunteering their time in order to help maintain the system of our democracy, which is voting. And Faith, for me, what that signals is, in particular in urban-centered areas where there's large amounts of black voter base, we already see there's a huge campaign and a push for voter suppression. And so what we need in those moments are public servants who are willing to volunteer their time to ensure the safety of our elections, to ensure the safety of those who are showing up to the polls to vote, to exercise their right to vote, and to make sure that it is done with efficiency without having the fear of having their lives upended and traumatized because people online could post something about them that could ruin their lives and their mental capabilities going forward. And so I think this is the purpose of this trial, is to set a price that is high enough to make people give pause before they will even attempt to harass election workers, while still encouraging poll workers to still volunteer in their cities, their neighborhoods, and their districts in order to ensure a smooth election day.
And it seems like we're going to have to wait at least one more day before the jury comes to a decision on this. But LZ, is there any potential redemption arc to be had here for Giuliani? We've talked about his fall from grace, right? Or do you think we could see him face even more financial and legal trouble in the months and years ahead?
First of all, I have no interest in salvaging anything that has to do with Rudy Giuliani. Well, I understand why a lot of people like to say, oh my gosh, remember what he did for 9/11? I also remember what his poll numbers were like before 9/11. I remember him being investigated for corruption and using the police department to escort his mistress. So I know we like to think about all the great things about Rudy Giuliani, but everything that has transpired isn't exactly foreign from the person that we know in the public space. So with that being said, no, I don't see him coming back from this, and I don't really care about him coming back from this. I care about the two women who had their lives changed because of what he said. I care about the two black women who were being harassed in the shadow of Ahmaud Arbery's death. Put this in context. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and there's this, this mob being sent to chase them, and they have no peace. And who sends the mob? An extension of Donald Trump, who represents January 6th. So when you put all of that in context, no, I don't care about Rudy Giuliani, having any redemption. I care about these two women finally having some peace.
Well, no matter what happens in this case, there seems to be more criminal and civil cases ahead for Giuliani to deal with. Mike, John, Heidi, and Liz, thank you guys so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.